In the summer of 1969, Los Angeles basked in endless sunshine and Hollywood glamour, but beneath its golden surface, a darkness was festering, one that would soon shatter America's innocence forever. The City of Angels was about to become the backdrop for one of the most horrifying crime sprees in history. At the center of this darkness stood Charles Manson, a failed musician turned cult leader whose magnetic personality drew vulnerable young followers into his web of manipulation and violence. His piercing eyes and apocalyptic prophecies would transform a group of seemingly normal young people into instruments of unimaginable terror. What happened over 2 nights in August 1969 would send shockwaves through the nation, shattering the peace and love ideology of the 60s and ushering in an era of fear. This is the story of the Manson family murders, a tale of cult manipulation, savage violence, and the end of America's innocence. Born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, Charles Mills Manson entered the world as the son of Kathleen Maddox, a 16-year-old unmarried mother. From his earliest years, stability was a foreign concept. His mother, often absent and struggling with alcoholism, would frequently leave young Charles with relatives or neighbors for days or weeks at a time. By the age of 9, Manson was already exhibiting troubling behavior, including setting his school on fire and engaging in petty theft. His mother's brief marriage to William Manson gave him the surname he would make infamous, but provided little in terms of paternal guidance. When Kathleen was later imprisoned for armed robbery, Charles found himself shuffled between relatives who viewed him as a burden. In his early teens, Manson's path toward criminality began to take shape. At age 12, he was placed in the Gibault School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana, a Catholic-run institution for male delinquents. Rather than reform him, this experience only honed his survival instincts and ability to manipulate others. By 1951, he had graduated to stealing cars and crossing state lines, resulting in his transfer to the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. The pivotal moment came in 1952 when Manson was sent to the Federal Reformatory at Petersburg, Virginia, after violently assaulting another boy. His behavior there was so concerning that authorities moved him to a more secure facility in Chillicothe, Ohio. It was during these formative years in various institutions that Manson developed his understanding of power dynamics and psychological manipulation, skills he would later use to devastating effect. By the time he reached his late teens, Manson had spent more than half his life in correctional facilities. These institutions, meant to rehabilitate, instead served as training grounds, where he learned to read people's vulnerabilities and manipulate them to his advantage. The troubled child from Cincinnati was evolving into something far more dangerous, a master manipulator who would eventually lead his followers down a path of unprecedented violence. After his release from prison in 1967, Charles Manson made his way to San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district during the peak of the Summer of Love. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for someone with his particular talents. The streets were filled with young people searching for meaning, rejecting traditional values, and looking for someone to follow. Manson, with his intense gaze and guitar, positioned himself as exactly what they were seeking. His first followers were primarily young women, many from middle-class families, who had left home seeking adventure and purpose. Manson had an uncanny ability to spot vulnerability, and he offered these lost souls exactly what they craved: acceptance, understanding, and a sense of belonging. He would spend hours engaging in philosophical discussions, mixing biblical references with Beatles lyrics, creating an intoxicating spiritual cocktail that drew people deeper into his orbit. Manson was particularly obsessed with the Beatles' White Album, interpreting songs like Helter Skelter and Revolution 9 as prophetic messages about an impending race war. He convinced his followers that they were the chosen ones, destined to survive this apocalyptic conflict and emerge as its rulers. The group began to take shape as a family unit, with Manson establishing himself as both father figure and spiritual guide. He used a combination of sex, drugs, and psychological manipulation to break down his followers' connections to the outside world. Those who joined the family were given new names, symbolizing their rebirth into what Manson called a higher consciousness. In 1968, the family found their permanent home at Spahn Ranch, a defunct movie set in Los Angeles County. The 80-acre property, with its dusty buildings and isolated location, provided the perfect setting for Manson to fully implement his control. George Spahn, the elderly owner, allowed the group to stay in exchange for help, maintaining the property and female companionship. Life at the ranch took on an almost medieval quality. The women served as servants and sexual partners, while Manson positioned himself as the undisputed leader. Daily life involved group sex, drug use, and long sessions where Manson would preach his apocalyptic philosophy. The family grew to include several dozen members, all living communally and subsisting largely through petty crime and scavenging. Manson's control was absolute. He dictated everything from sleeping arrangements to food distribution. He would orchestrate elaborate psychological games, including mock executions, to test loyalty and maintain control through fear. What began as a seemingly peaceful hippie commune was transforming into something far more sinister, setting the stage for the violence that would soon follow. By the summer of 1969, the peaceful facade of the Manson family was beginning to crack. Charles Manson's paranoia had reached fever pitch, and his prophecies of an approaching apocalyptic race war grew increasingly violent. The first major incident occurred on July 1st when Manson confronted Bernard Latsapapa Crow, a drug dealer who he believed had cheated the family in a transaction. The confrontation ended with Manson shooting Crow. Though Crow survived, Manson mistakenly believed he had killed him. He also incorrectly assumed Crow was a Black Panther and feared retaliation. This incident marked a crucial turning point, transforming Manson's abstract violent fantasies into concrete actions. The situation escalated further with the Gary Hinman incident. On July 25, 1969, Manson sent Bobby Beausoleil, along with Mary Brunner and Susan Atkins, to Hinman's house to demand money. The ordeal lasted 2 days, ending with Beausoleil fatally stabbing Hinman. During the nightmare at Hinman's house, Manson himself appeared, slashing Hinman's face with a sword before leaving Beausoleil and others to finish what he had started. The torture continued until Beausoleil finally killed Hinman, stabbing him multiple times. In a chilling preview of what was to come, they wrote "Political Piggy" on the wall in Hinman's blood, attempting to make the murder appear as if it had been committed by militant Black activists. The Hinman murder marked a significant shift in the family's dynamics. The act of killing had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and Manson's control over his followers had reached new heights. Those who participated in the murder were now bound to him by blood, their loyalty secured through shared guilt. The family's descent into violence was accelerating, and what had once been philosophical discussions about death and revolution were becoming terrifying reality. As July turned to August, Manson's rhetoric became increasingly focused on the need to show the Blacks how to start his prophesied race war. His followers, now desensitized to violence and completely under his spell, stood ready to carry out whatever instructions he gave them. The stage was set for the horrific events that would soon shock the nation and forever change the way America viewed the hippie movement. The night of August 8, 1969, would forever change the landscape of American culture. Under Manson's direction, Charles Tex Watson led Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenenkel, and Linda Kasabian to 10050 Cielo Drive. Their target was a house Manson knew well, the former home of heir of record producer Terry Melcher, now occupied by actress Sharon Tate and her husband Roman Polanski. Manson had briefly crossed paths with Melcher, hoping to secure a music deal, but was rejected. This rejection fueled his resentment and may have influenced his choice of targets. What followed was a scene of unimaginable brutality. 8.5 months pregnant, Sharon Tate pleaded for her life and that of her unborn child, but found no mercy. Celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Frykowski were subjected to dozens of stab wounds. Stephen Parent, a teenager who had been visiting the property's caretaker, was shot multiple times in his car while trying to leave. Before departing, the killers used Tate's blood to write the word "pig" on the front door, but the nightmare wasn't over. On August 9, 1969, Manson accompanied the group to the LaBianca residence. He entered the home with Tex Watson, tied up the couple, reassured them, then left, instructing his followers to kill them. The killers found forks in the LaBianca's kitchen and used them to carve war into Leno's abdomen. A knife was left protruding from his throat. Messages were scrawled across the walls in the victim's blood: rise, death to pigs, and Helter Skelter, a misspelled reference to the Beatles' song Manson believed prophesied an apocalyptic race war. The brutality of these murders sent shockwaves through Los Angeles. The random nature of the victims, the savage violence, and the bizarre blood writings transformed the city's sense of security into paralyzing fear. The Summer of Love had officially ended, giving way to a new era of paranoia and suspicion. Hollywood's elite began installing security systems and hiring bodyguards, while ordinary citizens double-checked their locks at night, wondering if they might be next. The murders represented more than just senseless violence. They were carefully orchestrated acts of terror designed to fulfill Manson's twisted vision. Each detail, from the choice of victims to the bloody messages left behind, was meant to spark what Manson called Helter Skelter, his prophesied race war that would tear society apart and ultimately place him in power over the survivors. The investigation into these brutal murders initially stumped the Los Angeles Police Department. Despite the similarities between the crime scenes, detectives worked the Tate and LaBianca cases separately, missing crucial connections. It wasn't until Susan Atkins, already in custody on unrelated charges, began bragging to fellow inmates about her involvement in the murders that the pieces started falling into place. By October 1969, the LAPD had gathered enough evidence to arrest Charles Manson and several family members. The subsequent trial became a media sensation unlike anything America had seen before. For 9 months, the nation watched as prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi methodically built his case against Manson and his followers. The trial itself became a spectacle, with Manson and his co-defendants frequently disrupting proceedings with outbursts and bizarre behavior. Female followers maintained a vigil outside the courthouse, their heads shaved in solidarity with Manson. Inside, the defendants often broke into song during testimony, carved X's into their foreheads, and attempted to intimidate witnesses with penetrating stares. Manson himself tried to leap at Judge Charles Older while brandishing a sharpened pencil, shouting, "Someone should cut your head off." The prosecution's star witness, Linda Kasabian, provided devastating testimony about the nights of the murders. Having never participated in the actual killings, she was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her detailed accounts, combined with physical evidence and corroborating witnesses, proved overwhelming. On January 25, 1971, the jury found Manson, Watson, Atkins, and Krennickel guilty of first-degree murder. All were sentenced to death. However, their sentences were automatically commuted to life imprisonment when the California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty in 1972. Despite numerous parole hearings over the decades, most of the convicted killers remained behind bars, serving out their life sentences in various California prisons. Susan Atkins died in prison in 2009, while Charles Manson himself would spend nearly half a century in custody before his death in 2017. On November 19, 2017, Charles Manson died at the age of 83 in a California hospital, ending nearly 5 decades of incarceration. His death, rather than closing the book on one of America's most notorious crimes, seemed to spark renewed interest in the case and its lasting impact on our culture. Even from beyond the grave, Manson's shadow continues to loom large over American society. The aftermath of the Manson saga continues to unfold. In 2023, Leslie Van Houten was recommended for parole, but the decision faced legal challenges before her eventual release. Her case sparked intense debate about rehabilitation, justice, and the possibility of redemption even for those involved in history's most heinous crimes. The cultural impact of the Manson murders cannot be overstated. The case fundamentally altered America's sense of security and innocence, marking the symbolic end of the peace and love era of the 1960s. The murders exposed the dark underbelly of the hippie movement and forever changed how we view charismatic leadership and cult psychology. Today, the Manson family murders continue to captivate new generations through countless books, documentaries, and dramatic adaptations. The case has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of manipulation, the power of personality, and the potential for evil that lurks beneath the surface of our society. Even as legal battles rage over Manson's estate, including rights to his music and personal belongings, the true legacy of these crimes lies in their profound impact on American consciousness and our collective understanding of human nature's darker possibilities. More than half a century later, the Manson family murders remain deeply embedded in America's cultural consciousness, serving as a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for both evil and manipulation. The events of those 2 nights in August 1969 forever changed how we view the darker aspects of charismatic leadership and the vulnerability of those seeking belonging. What began as a story of wayward youth and counterculture ideology evolved into one of America's most chilling cautionary tales about the dangers of blind devotion and the thin line between influence and control. As we've explored throughout this episode, the ripples of these murders continue to spread through our society, from changes in security practices to our understanding of cult psychology, from true crime journalism to the way we view celebrity culture. The Manson family murders have left an indelible mark on every aspect of American life. The nightmare Manson created didn't end with his death. His story remains a dark testament to the dangers of blind devotion and the fragility of the human mind.